Commissioner Rain, can you start us out with the Pledge of Allegiance this morning?
Sure. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. We usually do roll call at this time, Suzanne. I'm sure we have some different county advisory, or maybe we don't have different county advisory boards here this morning. Yes.
Chairman Ross.
Here.
Vice Chairman Drew.
Here.
Commissioner McBeth.
Here.
Commissioner McNish.
Here.
Commissioner Moore.
He's absent, yes.
Commissioner Rain.
Here.
Commissioner Wallace.
Here.
And Commissioner Guest.
Here. And the county advisory boards?
Paul Dixon, Clark.
Rex Flowers, Washoe. John Reed, Washoe. Larry Allen, Humboldt. Joe Green, Virgin. Larry Lyon. And Biennial, Lyon. John Martin, Hartford.
All right, thank you guys. We'll move on to agenda item number 10, member items, announcements, correspondence. Anybody have anything else to add? Jeremy?
I just had one. I'd like to thank Brad Bauman with Endow and Winnemucca. He took us on a tour of the greenhouse yesterday up at the high school, and it's a pretty neat program. The kids at the high school plant seedlings of bitterbrush and sagebrush in the fall, and then they take them out in the spring and summer and do conservation projects and fire rehab. So pretty neat, kind of a testament to the community and the good things they're doing up here, being proactive. So appreciate that.
Commissioner Rain?
Thank you. You know, we had several requests yesterday from Dr. Spratling, and I think that, you know, it seems that there's pretty much universal support for those about proactively working with cattlemen for various things. And I don't know if this commission is aware of it, but many of those, not all of them, but many of them, were covered under this commission's mule deer policy that were so cavalierly suspended perhaps last year. I recommend you might want to read that policy again, or possibly read it for the first time and find that it does contain policy level, broad view solutions to many of those particular issues. We're dealing with specifically the decadent habitat and the rotational grazing issues that's been brought up again and again. Another thing is interesting that's come up here, I've got some correspondence on and spoke to some people about, and that was that, you know, the Commission's fairly well aware that, you know, we hear, you know, time and again that the federal matching funds can't be used for predation control. And it's interesting that in Utah, my understanding is that matching funds can and are currently being utilized for exactly that. And they tell me that the only reason that they cannot or are not matched in Nevada is due to the political will of the administration here. Heritage projects, deadline has passed for the end of last year's projects, and I'd like to ask, you know, which project reports are in, you know, which ones are final, and if we could, you know, get a brief report on that, and then eventually hard copies and electronic copies of those reports, because I know there was a bunch of them. Some of them were hot-button issues, and I'd like to see how some of them turned out. So I don't know if we could, you know, ask which ones are in, and we please get those reports that are here. And then my understanding is they're already supposed to be in. Is that the date? It's already passed. I mean, they're supposed to be in June 30th. And they had a month or two to get
Patrick's here. So.
Reports, right?
You want an answer to that now?
Yeah, if we could, that way.
For the record, Patrick Cates. The project period ended June 30th. People have 90 days to submit completion reports. So we should get them around the 1st of October. I'm sure we've collected some, but I'm not sure which, but they're not actually due until the fall. And when we have them all, we'll certainly bring it before the commission.
as I know in September, we're going to have, whatever ones are here by September, if anybody want to talk about those, and then the ones that are, so we can break them up between then and maybe the December meetings. There's going to be a bunch. I would appreciate it, and on my behalf, if that's okay with the chair.
Commissioner Macbeth?
Okay, yes, I've got a couple items. First of all, in a follow-up to our last meeting, I reported that I'd received an open meeting law complaint from Dr. Lent, and we have since submitted a response to that open meeting law complaint. I worked with Cassandra Joseph, and we put that together along with an affidavit that I put together to basically lay out exactly everything that happened. And so we haven't heard back yet, but I would imagine by September we should have an answer on that. Second item is that I had received an email from David Allen, who is the president of the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, asking if I could check into an issue dealing with Cameron Haynes. Cameron is I don't know if you guys, anybody watches the Outdoor Channel, but he's one of these guys that, one of these hunting pros, and apparently what he had done is he had purchased a landowner elk incentive tag, and when he tried to get his tag, he was notified that he was basically not in compliance with our reporting. He had apparently drawn a mule deer tag last year, and had failed to submit his hunter report. And so I forwarded that email on to the director, and the director basically took over from there, and they did copied me on it. They did a very, very thorough investigation between the Department of Wildlife and System Consultants. Did a very, very thorough review of everything, and unfortunately for Mr. Haynes, the documentation clearly showed that he had had multiple opportunities to get his return card in. They'd sent him letters. They had the letters. It was to his address, and there was just literally no explanation why he couldn't comply. And so anyway, they did a very good job sending him a letter explaining the decision, and so anyway, it's too bad we have to deny sportsmen an opportunity, but at the same time we've got we have put in place a reporting mechanism that is very important, and all sportsmen need to understand that it's important and be a part of the process in getting the information back to the department that is necessary for our monitoring the populations and making sure that we get the good data back. And so anyway, so I just thought that was a very, very professional and thorough response, and I want to commend the department and system consultants on all the work that they did doing that.
He's not the first one to get stuck in the middle of that. There's a couple of commissioners who know somebody very well, and some rules were even relaxed after that to make it easier to comply with it. And if those rules were relaxed and they still don't do it, there's not much we can do for them at that point. So, any other commissioners have anything?
Just need to finish my... Thank you. Yeah, I actually had just a couple more. One of them is directly relevant to the area up here, and that is, we talked before, a couple meetings ago, I believe we had BLM Deputy Director Natural Resources Raul Morales talking to us at a meeting, a couple meetings back, about do not control areas for wildfires, and I think he was specifically referring to pinyon juniper areas. And I'd mentioned at the last meeting that, that the BLM district up here, specifically the Battle Mountain area, that my understanding is that they have no such instruction whatsoever has ever been given to them. And in more recent days and in direct contact with many of the other firefighters, there are none. You know, I mean, there just aren't. In other districts as well. I've been talking to these guys, and you know, you talk, well, is this in one of these do not control districts? And we're going into the eastern region over there. We don't go very often. And like, any what? They haven't even heard the terminology. I know we wandered into a couple areas that chasing down some individual tree starts where BLM is doing studies in the process for burning out. And there we are putting out individual trees. I would think that would be a priority for the Department of Wildlife to get them to go ahead and come up with what they talked about before, which is those maps that supposedly, we were told, exist, and transmit those down to the BLM statewide level and then to the local levels as well. And also, if you remember, a portion, perhaps might not remember, of the suspended policy number 27, item 8 was natural fire cycles are a basic, and it's pretty short here, part of habitat. I'll go through that, but rapid initial suppression should be initiated in designated crucial mule deer habitat. No control zones for fire suppression will be recommended. An area where burning may be beneficial to wildlife habitat. A map for firefighting agencies of the most critical habitat areas that should receive maximum suppression effort should be developed. We've been in some very critical areas. Nobody's ever heard of such maps. There are no maps. If they are, what good are they? Because they're sitting in somebody's office. If we need to have, if there are some critical areas for wildlife and they have been mapped out, they need to be given to the people that are doing the firefighting, because they don't know about it and they've never heard of it. And that, I think, is basically it. Thank you.
All right. Any other commission items? All right. We'll move on to item number 11, County Advisory Boards. Member items. Anybody have anything this morning? Mr. Dixon?
For the record, Paul Dixon, Clark Cab. Yesterday I talked about the hatchery, and that's kind of using my time, but today, since Elmer was here and Ken, I wanted to take the time to say that we have been getting tremendous support from the department for my advisory board meetings. I'm averaging between 40 and 100 people at a meeting, and I've started to use the meetings to educate the public on a lot of the other informational issues that we have here, not just our action agenda items. And we had John Solberg came and dealt with some very contentious fishery issues from the fisheries people, where they had put together 5 related facts into one string of facts that were unrelated, if you know what I mean. And he did a very good job of that. Russell came down and sat with us through the waterfall stuff, since we don't have a waterfall summit, was very instrumental in helping us work through some issues on that stuff. Laura Richards gave me a falconry status update, although she was going to come down. I said she didn't need to, and I gave that status update to the people who are interested, because we have falconers that live out in southern Nevada, quite a few. Perry was going to come down, and Perry ended up giving me a nice, I said just a short overbrief, but a 12-slide presentation that I read from to the public, which was very good, just about bighorn disease stuff like she presented here. And then finally, Brad Hardenbrook came and basically updated us on wild horses and wildfire issues. All excellent. And I think for the CAB and the public, it's so important we have the action items and the agendas and all the things we hit, but be able to educate them on these other things that we're doing has been tremendously important to me. And I appreciate the tremendous support your team, Ken, is giving us, and Elmer, and I just wanted to make that for public record, that's been a really big boon. And I got people coming and say, you mean your meeting's not only talking about trapping anymore? And I've really used the last couple of meetings to really shift gears, and it's been a big boon for attendance and education. And finally, I'd like to end with A Night with Tony Wasley was a smashing success down in southern Nevada. Woods and Waters hosted Tony, and Tony talked for darn near, what, 3 hours? At least 3 hours about all issues related to mule deer. The most important thing I can say about that meeting is Tony came down and talked to the guys that sit in the barbershops, sit in the bars, sit around tables drinking beers, and he dispelled so many of the myths that exist out there or gave people the information so they can, in their own mind, work with what is truth and not truth about things that they've been hearing for the last 5 or 6 years. It was incredibly educational. I've gotten probably 30 emails from people saying it was the most educational thing that they've had. So thank you for that. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other county advisory boards? Seeing none, we'll go on to agenda item number 12, Nevada Department of Wildlife fiscal year 2014-15 biannual budget request, Deputy Director Patrick Cates. This is an action item.
Good morning. I want to make sure everybody has the handouts for this agenda item. They were sent out separately from the mailed package. You should have a document entitled Priorities and Performance-Based Budgeting, PPBB. You should also have another document, a small print spreadsheet entitled NDOW Line Item Budget Summary.
Are they on the back table if anybody needs one?
They are. I have copies here. Let me, and we also have another one entitled NDOW Budget Enhancements. You can pass those out to them. And there's some on the back table if anybody in the audience wants to see them. Yes, there's three handouts there.
Let's see.
And I know the Finance Committee also reviewed this agenda item and wanted to give a report. I don't know if you want to do that before or after I go through this.
Why don't I do it after?
Okay. While she's passing that out, let me just kind of give an overview of what we're doing here, particularly for those who are new to the commission or maybe not familiar with the state's budgeting process. What we're doing here today is addressing the provisions of NRS 501.337.6. That section deals with the duties of the director, the Department of Wildlife. It is one of the duties of the director enumerated in that statute is to submit the biennial budget request to the governor and the budget office. As part of subparagraph 6, it also requires the director to consult with the commission on the preparation of that budget and give the commission an opportunity to provide input. Our budgets are due to the budget office at the end of this month. August 31st is the final day for submission. It's an online budgeting system. They turn the switch at 5 o'clock, and whatever's in the system is our submitted biennial budget. What this budget covers is state fiscal year 14 and 15. State fiscal year 14 starts in July 2013, so a year from now, and runs through a 2-year cycle ending in June 2015. So that's what we mean by submitting the budget. We're planning out a year ahead for what our budget will be for the next 2 years. One of the key pieces of building that biennial budget is the base budget. The primary driver of what goes into our budget are our actual expenditures in a base fiscal year. For this biennial build, that base fiscal year is 2012, which is the fiscal year that just ended on June 30th. So whatever those actual expenditures are, that makes up really the bulk of our budget. And I'll go through that in handouts in more detail in just a minute. Then we adjust the base budget. We make adjustments to annualize the payroll, take out equipment, one-time purchases that aren't going to occur in the next biennium, annualize major contracts, some of those sort of things. And then after we determine the adjusted base budget, then anything different that we want to do, new equipment, any new program initiatives, adding a program, making reductions in a program, eliminating positions, it goes both ways. Those are all considered enhancement units. And each one's discreetly prepared as a budget proposal, basically, and what all those costs are and what the purpose is. And that's added, layered on to that base budget. All of those submissions are reviewed by the Budget Office and the Governor's Office starting August 31st, clear through the fall until January, when the Governor decides what he's going to include in his budget, and he formally submits that budget to the legislature. And then the legislature, well, there's hearings, and we go through all that process, and usually about May or even June, the final budgets are approved by the legislature. And then that's what we lived with for 2 years. We can make changes to that budget in the interim. We often do work programs to augment or change that budget that was legislatively approved. We have to take that to the interim finance committee of the legislature, but the majority of what we live with in our budget is done through this process. The finance committee has been looking at this issue through a series of meetings, and I think we've walked through what the process is for budgeting and how we've prepared our adjusted base budget and some of those enhancement units. See if there's anything else I want to say. I think we'll just go ahead and jump into the handouts. The first handout I want to talk about is priorities and performance-based budgeting, or performance-based budget. And this is a new piece in building our biennial budget. This is an initiative of the Governor to sort of strategically line out and categorize the services of government in a way that makes sense to him and to the public, to try to prioritize what we're doing. And the Department of Wildlife is basically a very small piece of this effort, and most of what we do falls under conservation of resources, and we're just a very small piece of this. But it gives a sort of an overlay from almost a strategic planning standpoint of what we're going to do as state government. And it's been a really interesting effort. The process that I just described to you previously is line item budgeting and base budgeting. It's a bit of an archaic way of budgeting. Most states have moved away from that, and they've moved more towards a strategic priorities planning type of budgeting process, which is what this is. And I think the Governor and his staff have done a really great job. It's modeled after a lot of states, but I know in particular they looked at Oregon to try to organize this. And you know, it's at a 30,000 foot level, so what it means to us as an agency, it's kind of high level stuff. But it's a better way for policymakers, for people like the Governor and the legislature, to look at all these different agencies and the services they're rendering and really get some sense of what those dollars are going towards, rather than looking at you know, how many pens they're budgeted for or things of that nature, which you do a lot of in line item budgeting. I won't go into any detail on this. You can look at that at your leisure. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Basically, we have one activity for each one of our divisions, and underneath that, you can see how it fits in the Governor's strategic priorities. There are some performance measures. Some of those are performance measures that are at the Governor's budget level. For instance, sage grouse habitat is a performance indicator. It's seeking to measure the change in priority sage grouse habitat across the state, plus or minus acreage of priority sage grouse habitat. That's one that was important enough to the Governor that he elevated that up to his budgetary level. And there is a link there to the Budget Division's website if you want to know more about priorities and performance-based budgeting. There's a lot of material there, and you can kind of see how this all fits together. What we'll do when we complete the line item budgets is roll up those costs under each one of these activities. And the way we're structured budgetarily, we have basically one budget per division already. So the activities are described, one activity per division, so it'll be a pretty simple process to roll that up. And are there any questions at this point before I dive into some more numbers? try not to make people's eyes glaze over. Okay, the next document I want to talk about is the NDOW line item budget summary. This actually is several pages, about 9 pages long, and what this is a high-level overview of our preliminary adjusted base budget. We did this back in June. The fiscal year wasn't closed in June. We're in the process of closing the fiscal year right now. It's still not actually closed. It won't be completely closed, actually, by the budget office until September. So these numbers will change even after we submit to the budget office our budget request as they kind of roll in the final fiscal year 12 numbers. But this is pretty close on the money. You know, it's a little light in some of the expenditure categories, but it does have the annualized personnel costs and all the major costs annualized, so I think it gives a pretty good estimate of where our adjusted base budget will finally land once that's closed. And what you can see on this page, this one-page summary, is basically the roll-up for each one of the division budgets. And I'm just giving it to you at a very high level. I'm trying to detail the different types of revenue streams. You can see all of the major federal grants named that we have. You can see how each division is funded with those grants. So for instance, wildlife restoration, federal grants in fiscal year 14, NDOW in total is our base budget is funded with $6.3 million of that grant. And as you go down and look at some of the other categories of revenue, there's transfers of unrestricted revenue about in the middle of that revenue listing there towards the top of the page. If everybody sees that, the dollar amount on the right-hand side would be $9 million. Transfer unrestricted revenue. Unrestricted revenue is basically sportsman's fees. When we talk about sportsman's dollars, this is primarily what we're talking about. These are all license sales, tag sales, various types of permits go into that category. Transfer application fee, that also is part of unrestricted reserve. That's rolled in there as well. And then you get down to some of these other specific types of fees, the predator fee, duck stamp, upland game stamp. Those are all restricted reserves because they have a specified use in statute. We keep those separate from the general license fees so that we make sure we're only using those funds for the activities that are authorized under statute. And then as you get down towards the bottom of that list, we have transfer of boating revenue. That's all our boating licenses and title fees. The boating program also runs on some other state fees, motorboat fuel tax, also runs on a federal Coast Guard grant. This is just the fees that we collect and use for the program. Now these are the operating budgets, so it's saying transfer because that's how much each one of those budgets is going to use of those fees to fund their operations for that fiscal year. And we collect all the fees in a special account where we reconcile all of our revenue and hold it in those reserves until we need it operationally to transfer out to these various budget accounts.
Could I point out that what you're seeing here is something that's straightforward. This was what we had hoped to end up with when we did the total budget revamp. Because when some of it's been around, you know, it used to all go in one pot, and then you try to figure out where the money was coming from and where it was going. And I think Patrick needs a lot of praise for his staff being able to pull this together. So I think anybody could look at this and figure out where the money's coming and where it's going. So.
Yeah, we were actually under legislative direction last session to break out our budgets. Basically, all of this was in one giant budget, very difficult to track. And so this is the first biennium we have this breakout. And it really does help a lot management-wise. It's more complicated to administer accounting-wise, but we're learning how to deal with that. It's a big improvement.
I had a quick question for you, Patrick, and I do appreciate the layout. I mean, it makes it very easy to see what's coming and what's going. On your bottom line revenue, you have cost allocations down there, and that's obviously a pretty significant chunk. Can you give us a sense of where that cost allocations, what source that's coming from?
Yes. When you look at the total revenue or total expenditures for that fiscal year 14, it's about $36 million. But the cost allocations are internal transfers within those budgets. And basically, they're the indirect cost charges that we charge to all the various programs. There's basically 3 major elements that compose cost allocation. The biggest element is our indirect cost rate charge. All of our programs have an indirect cost charge for administrative expenses. For instance, the director's office staff, some of our public relations staff are cost allocated, our information technology staff are cost allocated, and it's a standard cost allocation that we do every year that gets approved by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and we're required, to charge those rates to all of our federal programs. And so that's what the biggest component is to fund that, and it funds, those programs I named. The director's office, operations division has like our IT staff and engineering and conservation education. So you can see them as revenues into those 3 budget accounts under revenue, and then you can see under expenditures, you can see how each one of those divisions is paying their share of cost allocation. Now, indirect costs is only one element. Another big dollar amount element are centrally allocated costs, particularly our vehicle costs, and uniforms is another one. So we pay, we have one budget category in the director's office for all the vehicles that we have in our entire fleet. So when we do repairs to those vehicles, when we buy gasoline for them, they're all paid out of that one category. It'd be much more difficult to manage if we had an amount under each division and had to constantly adjust based on price of fuel or something breaking down. So we have it as an allocated cost. So everything's paid out of there, and as people use their vehicles, they all maintain logs about which program they're using it for, under what mileage, and our accounting staff get all that information, and then they cost charge all the programs to reimburse for that. So that's what that is.
So on the revenue side, it's a combination of either federal or fee-based.
Exactly.
On the income
Yeah.
side of it.
Yeah, and it's accounted for in those divisional budgets. They pull in the federal funds or fees as it may be, and they pay all those allocated costs.
And we are doing a lot better in getting the feds to pay for vehicles through the grant process.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
That's taken a while to weave through. Tell me what the rules of the game are. Sometimes it's not as transparent as you'd like, but we figured that out.
So this basically constitutes our preliminary adjusted base budget. It's the bulk of what we're asking for. Doesn't change a whole lot from year to year. Like I say, this is based on fiscal year 12 numbers. I won't go into any more detail on this unless you have questions, but each page beyond that shows detail on each one of those budgets. You can see the specific revenue sources that are funding each one of those divisions, and then there's expenditure categories that group the expenditures based on programs, and we are limited to spending within those categories. We're not allowed to exceed one of those categories unless we do a work program, and if it's a big work program, it has to go to the interim finance committee. We have to get that changed as an exception to the budget and go through the budget office in order to make those changes. So otherwise, we're legally bound to the expenditure amounts that are shown in the categories on the detail pages.
Commissioner McNich.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, so I guess I'll take the first shot at getting us rolling here. Under the game management division, there's a line item for bearware, and it's listed at $28. And I've tried
Yes.
to
28,000.
kind of compare it with the NDOW budget enhancement document that you sent out, and I'm not quite able to line things up. Probably could use your help, but I guess the question is, there's obviously some enhancements proposed for the urban bear management stuff.
That's correct.
And I saw it, and I noticed it in a number of the divisions, not just any one, not just game division. I think it was game division, I think Con Ed, and I think law enforcement all had sections on the urban bear stuff.
Yeah, yes. That's correct. And in my next document, I'll go through that in some
Do you
detail.
want me to wait for a minute? I'll wait.
Well, if you want, because this is just the adjusted budget. But I can speak to that $28 that you're seeing there on Category 21 for BearAware. These were actual expenditures as we had uploaded into the system to that point. The actual total budget for FY12 for BearAware is about $1,700. And I do know that after this was prepared, I've looked at the accounts, and I know basically that pays for brochures. And I did see that they had placed a late order for brochures, and I believe they're up over $1,000 of actual expenditures. That'll be in the base once that's all rolled up. But it is very small, the existing budget for BearAware.
Maybe I'll wait until we
And then
go through this other stuff. And
the
I'll
other
be able
one is
Yeah,
coming.
maybe we'll go through this one. I'll frame my,
Okay.
And if you recall, because BearAware was supported by general fund, that got cut.
right, understood.
So,
Yeah.
and we kept the 1,700 because we wanted to put brochures out and whatnot, even though we have been expending personnel time to do the interact.
Yeah, you know, I didn't point it out, but the general fund in this base budget is just under $500,000. You know, we were at one time between general fund and tourism funds at about $1.7 million. That was back in 06, 07 kind of time frame. And it's been cut and cut and cut and cut. And we had to eliminate all general funding of all the, basically all nuisance wildlife work that we used to fund with general fund and really strip it down to just public safety issues, which of course is a lot of that's bears. So.
Commissioner Macbeth?
I was actually going to make the comments that the director made with regard to where the budget was, and our last biennium with BearAware and the general fund. And so anyway, I think you covered it. But the Finance Committee did ask all these questions, and so I was going to report on them. But it's good that you're seeing it. And you'll note that when we get to the budget enhancements, you can see where we are requesting those funds from general fund. So we're trying to get it back.
Right.
Okay. We can move on to the document endow budget enhancements. Now, this includes equipment as well as new program initiatives. We have went through a vetting process on these new programs. I think at least conceptually, the director supports these as budget initiatives. The equipment, we asked the chiefs to submit everything that they thought was necessary. We haven't yet really made a determination on which equipment we can support at this time. And the one thing that all of this hinges on that we are compiling right now is what that final reconciliation shows us in terms of how much license dollars we're going to need to fund this and how much federal funds that we need to fund this. I've looked at the numbers at a high level, and I believe we have enough federal funds to support these expenditures. We certainly have enough revenue to support the base budget expenditures and sustain that. And it looks like we can fund most of the new program initiatives as well. Most of those identify special funding sources. Any general fund requests, that's up to the governor's office whether or not we'll be allowed to include that, but we're still going to ask for it. But where we are going to have to draw the line is at some of the equipment and vehicle requests. The vehicles alone, it's $2 million worth of funding over the biennium to catch up priority vehicles up to the normal state's replacement schedule. We're not going to be able to fund that, but we have to fund some vehicles. We have to make investments in our fleet and in equipment, and that's really where that dividing line is. And we're not going to have that reconciliation complete until we're right up to the deadline of completing the budget, so we know exactly where we can draw that line. And like I said, even the base budget numbers are adjusted after GovRec, after we submit to the budget office. So, there could be even some fluctuation and change even after we submit on our deadline.
I also think it's important to point out on the vehicles, if you recall, I chose not to buy any vehicles till we really knew how much money we had in our checking account. And we had to go to IFC, if you remember, and we got tarred and feathered because we came after the budget had been, you know, signed and everything. And I just said, look, I'm not made to bet on the come and bring a phony number to you guys when I didn't know, we didn't really know how much money we were going to really have. And so we took our little lashing, but behind the scenes I was getting communications that, you know, right on, thanks a lot for doing that. But we had to beat you up at the hearing. So we have a backlog because we've not been buying vehicles. With the crunch time, we figured we could make it go one more year, but we're getting to where we've got vehicles that are costing us more than a new vehicle just to keep the transmissions and the engines and things in operating condition. So we are going to get at it, but it's not going to be a 1 or 2 year fix. It's going to be over some period of time, and taking the vehicles that got 180,000 miles, those are the ones that are coming off the line and replacing them. So,
yeah.
That's a question. Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Young?
What do you normally keep your vehicles how many miles?
Well, law enforcement is sooner, 100,000.
Well, the state standard's 100,000 miles, and that's the state standard for vehicles.
Is there an age standard or just the mileage?
7 years and 100,000 miles is the normal standard. I think like Highway Patrol, I think has a shorter time frame than that. And these are for vehicles that are on the road vehicles. Because our fleet's so aged, I mean, like 40% of our fleet's over 100,000 miles. And, you know, we're replacing warden and biologists who are, you know, field biologists in the field all the time. We're replacing their trucks at $150,000, $180,000, 100,000 miles. You know, and investing a lot in repairs, trying to keep that equipment going.
And we've, you know, included four-wheelers, so guys don't have to beat their trucks up. They can use a four-wheeler. NBU gave us some, I mean, so we've really been doing everything we can to
buy any slightly used vehicles.
And
that's what we did at Metro.
Yeah, and
same problem. You know, so instead of buying a brand new four-wheel drive, we would buy these. There's dealers that sell fleets of, you know, executive, you know, where their dealerships have used them for 10,000 miles or something. We save 12–15%.
But we need to look into that. I don't think we've tapped into that, but we have.
Particularly the four-wheel drives, because they're so expensive.
Yeah.
We had a lot on Metro, so.
We have picked up a lot of surplus vehicles from other agencies. They surplus them at 100,000. That looks new to us, so we pick it up.
Do you guys ever get surplus equipment from the military?
Not from the military.
Not certain. Wouldn't surprise me, but I'm not certain.
It's a big deal in law enforcement in the mainstream world. It's
well, one of the things
a lot available, particularly right now, because of how much the military's been ramped up. And I'm talking about all kinds of equipment, from vehicles to aircraft. I got two UE helicopters.
Did you?
For $2, $1 each, with two new engines in the can. Metro's still flying them today. So there's a lot of opportunity out there to get equipment.
One of the problems we ran into is that if it was like it was purchased with highway dollars, they couldn't transfer them to us. Other federal dollars, they have these restrictions, and we have the same problem. If we buy something with, you know, federal dollars and it's meant for a certain federal program, you know, we have a hard time, you know, making trade. So. We need to talk to you more about places to stick our nose into the tent.
On Metro, we actually have a unit that they go to these, they're called DRMOs. There's one down in, for example, near Barstow, and it's just as far as the eye can see equipment, you know, from four-wheelers to boats. I mean, our department has used all that stuff, particularly expensive stuff like aircraft. If you can know what you're doing and you're able to get into that, it's a hell of a deal. But from generators to trailers to just about anything that you can imagine. And it's only for law enforcement agencies, so I think we would all find. There's a lot of literature out there on it too, Ken. So maybe I'll
that'd be great. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay, so going through this document for budget enhancements, to me, this is really the best place that the commission can provide input and comments on some of these. If you want to support some of these or recommend we not pursue some of these. I think this document is really kind of the meat and potatoes of what you guys want to be looking at. So I'm going to go through this in some detail. The first item under the Director's Office, there's only one enhancement unit, and that's for new equipment. That is for a video conferencing system at 3 locations at our 3 regional offices, Reno, Vegas, and Elko. The purpose of this system primarily is to be able to support commission meetings. It should be robust enough to have adequate cameras and monitors and new microphones and a recording system, so we don't have to have separate cameras in the back that allow us to stream on the internet, do some of those kind of things at those 3 locations. And if we have a commission meeting in Reno, then we can have the other locations working connected via video conference so that CAB members, members of the public, even other commissioners wouldn't have to travel as much and could participate more. We think that'll really facilitate public participation. Commission's been asking for this for quite some time, and if we get this funded, then we'll have money for that a year from now, and we'll get the stuff set up and get it going. Wouldn't be exclusively for the Commission. The department would certainly use it as well. We spend a lot of time going back and forth having coordination meetings between our regional offices, and it would really help our internal communication as well.
Are we going to, do you want to take comment as we go along or afterwards, or how?
As we go along is fine.
As we go along.
Okay. I think that is, I mean, I know this stuff's expensive, but I think it's going to be money well spent. And we've heard it 1,000 times, if we've heard it once, that people, you know, they think we're in the dark ages, and in a lot of ways the department's way ahead of things, and in some other ways, and this is one of those places that it's going to be a real enhancement, and I think that's a great call. You know, it just takes away issues, just takes the issues off the table. We don't have to talk about it anymore, and I think every time we can do something like that, it's a real benefit. I know it just seems like money going into a can. Sometimes you don't get much benefit back, but I think that it's a huge benefit in the sense that it kind of calms the waters and gets people involved, and you take away, hey, you know, you have your opportunity and here it is, so get on it. So.
And for 2 years, we tried lesser operating systems on the cheap, and none of them ever worked.
Yeah.
So we said, well, we got to bite the bullet and do it.
And just to give you a sense of proportion, this is about maybe a little on the high side of what we spend every year for commission and cab travel expenses. We didn't propose any reductions to those expenses. We figure that'll kind of sort itself out over time. We didn't want to leave anything short, but we do expect to spend a lot less on travel over time and recoup this money.
That was going to be one of my next questions, and I had noticed that it looked like they were about the same. And I think it's important for the commission to meet in person. I think that there's a lot of benefits to that. It's being in person. So I know that there might be opportunities for people that can't travel to participate during the day and in those situations. But you know, I hope we don't replace our meetings as we go around the state and stuff with that. I wouldn't want to see that. But having said that, I certainly think it has its benefits.
Commissioner McBeth?
Yeah, but we have these discussions at the Finance Committee meeting, and I want to add that this is long overdue, and having our own system, we're not going to be, you know, at the mercy of any other agency and conflicts or anything like that. This is our system, and I think that you know, sharing it between the department and the commission, that you know, for all the reasons stated, that we're going to be in much better shape, and we won't have these comments, and I'll just be a little bit more specific than Commissioner McNinch, that there's any intent by this department or this commission to not give access to certain groups. You know, everybody will have access to the commission, you know, from these locations, and I think, like you said, a lot of that will go away.
Excuses.
Elmer?
Is this not working?
The problem is we tried to use their system. Speakers don't work real well, but he is recording for the video. So it's the catch-22. So I asked everybody to speak up. I think and the air conditioning is louder today, it seems.
Some of us need a microphone, some of us don't, and I think that's the way it basically goes. But, on that, I know it's tough for, some of y'all city folks, but, back out in the hills, like, I know Eureka's had this for way more than a decade, between the two centers, and, how much, it doesn't matter how much it spends, you paid for that already. I'm sure they paid for that 6 or 8 years ago. They don't have it just for one function, it's for every function. A little county like that, without any loot to speak of comparative to large agencies, the school has it, the county has it, everybody has it. You have to have it. For the committee meetings, for the staff members, my main thought is why would we have a veterinarian come all the way to come out here to give a presentation for a few minutes? Those are the savings right there. I don't think she gets 50 cents an hour, I would assume that, and, time is valuable and hopefully on working on. And there's a lot of personnel that come up for these 20-minute reports to these meetings that are, this would be perfect for those. The only question that, of course, comes to mind is what's going to happen with the commission's meetings, like here in Winnemucca, or 2 to 3 meetings a year. Are they going to no longer be anywhere except Vegas, Elko, Reno? That would be a decision that's got to come on. Is there other communities undoubtedly have support to hook into this? I don't know if Winnemucca does. They might very well have some way you could hook in. Has that been looked into while you're dealing with this system, for a portable system for those certain locations that have the high-speed connection necessary to connect with? Has that been looked into, and can this system, if you got T1 line dedicated to it, can you do it?
I'm not the technical communications person, but I do understand you can connect this into other video conferencing systems. Whether that would work in all circumstances, I'm not certain. Of course, the commission sets the agenda of where to have the meetings. It's certainly not the department's intent that this would replace meetings in rural areas, and it may be that we won't be able to video conference those, or if there's some way to patch the system in, we would certainly do that. That would obviously be ideal. And one of the reasons it's taken us so long to even hook this up, you mentioned the connections. We had to make some investments at all of our locations and to improve lines to connect. Out in Elko, they had such a poor connection that if too many people were working at once, it would slow down the entire network. So if you try to have a video conference there, you'd shut down the front counters. But we made some investments in better technology to improve those connections. We put in fiber connections in Vegas and in Reno in the last couple of years. I think we just finished Vegas this last year. And we couldn't get fiber in Elko, but we put in, I think it was an extra T1 line just so we could support this. And we hope to make some investments in some of our other offices over time to do the same thing. Winnemucca would be a good place to be able to do that. And if you have people spread around the state, you don't necessarily need quite as big of a room as you'd need if everybody's coming together. So yeah, we've thought about those things. We've made some of those investments ourselves, and where we can use it and interface with other systems, we absolutely will do so. And I'm also glad you mentioned the savings of staff time. I forgot to mention that. That's a huge one for us.
So when I'm looking at it, it's a lot of this. For instance, place I know better than most, Eureka. There's fiber optic cable run into the courthouse, right where they have the commission meetings, where they've been there before. If you have a system, can you plug into that there and everywhere else?
Yeah.
If you can, hey, it makes the same general format we have now with this. Is this system you're buying have a portable option? Is there a third one you can drag around to the commission meetings?
Yeah, there's portable equipment. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's just one of those questions. And if you don't, I mean, it almost doesn't matter what it costs. It'll pay for itself.
Yep.
Quickly.
Okay, moving on to the operations division. We've got some more equipment. The first enhancement unit is replacement equipment for information technology. This is a standard item that we include in every biennial budget. This is to keep all of our IT infrastructure current, replacing laptops, desktops, upgrading servers, that sort of thing. The standard Department of Information Technology schedule is to replace computers every 3 years to keep them current, keep their operating systems current and interfacing with the state's network. This request brings all of that equipment up to that standard. This is a little larger ask for IT equipment than we normally have because in the FY12-13 budget, we requested all of the equipment that we needed, but at the either budget office or legislature council bureau level, an error was made in the schedules, and where we had budgeted for 20 laptops with docking stations, the schedule is inadvertently changed to 20 docking stations, no laptops. So instead of almost $3,000 per item, it was about $300 per item. We did not adjust our budgets for that. We lived within that budget figure, and we replaced as much computers and laptops, that sort of thing, as we were able to with the amount of money we had. So we're kind of a little bit behind that replacement schedule. This would catch it up. I don't know if in every circumstances that's necessary. We always play with this number. We often don't replace everything that's on the list depending on who the users are, what types of things they're doing with the system, what kind of operating system they have, how well it's interfacing with our network. You know, some light users don't necessarily need their computers upgraded all that often, but I can tell you a lot of power users using you know, powerful software, and that goes from biologists to our engineers to our accountants. They need to keep those machines up to date and current. So this addresses those needs as well as our servers and you know, just everything we need to keep our IT infrastructure current. The next item on the list, this is a request to replace the telephone system at our Valley Road and Kitski offices. I'm sure everybody's familiar with our Valley Road office. That's our headquarters and Western Region office in Reno by UNR. The Kitski office is where the rest of our headquarters staff are housed across town in leased office space. That includes a lot of our operations staff, our business license office, as well as our accounting and engineers and personnel staff. The phone system that we are using is an antiquated phone system. It's basically a hand-me-down system from other state agencies. The Department of Information Technology, who oversees state phone systems, has been recommending to us for some years to replace that system. All of our equipment are hand-me-downs. We can get some refurbished equipment, but it is not a very easy to manage system, and eventually there won't be any parts available. So this request would give us a state-of-the-art system with an automated directory and be using the current handsets that most state agencies use. This will certainly save clerical staff time, and will make sure that we can continue to have a phone system for the public going into the future, because it's becoming increasingly untenable to maintain what we have. The total dollar amount is $101,000. I can tell you we have been working for some time, and I expect before this biennial budget rolls out that the Kitski staff will be moved. We're hoping they will be moved next door to us at the university's building right next door to us. In that case, this cost would go down somewhat. We would still need handsets, but this is basically two entirely separate systems for those two locations. So if we co-locate, that'll reduce the cost. Next item is proposal to basically reorganize some of the functions within our licensing office. The licensing office does all of the basically back office support for NWDS and the application hunt system. It's where a lot of the centralized processing occurs for boat registration and titling, some of those types of functions. The structure of this work unit has been based around the development of the NWDS system. We actually reclassed some of our managers to implement that system. For instance, we had one of our managers classified to a business process analyst for the duration of that project. A business process analyst is somebody that basically interfaces with the programmers and the end users and defines what the IT needs are out of the system and tries to communicate that to the programmers. Well, we finally completed the NWDS development project. All of the original parameters for that development effort were complete, and we are now transitioning into a maintenance mode for that system. That kind of changes the workflow. We're still going to have system improvements and changes, and we'll still have a bit of that development process going on, but at a much reduced level. Also, to accommodate development of NWDS and make sure that we had enough staffing resources for that, we basically pushed out some of the centralized boat titling and registration to the southern region staff and kind of outsourced that to them. Now that the project is complete, we want to bring that back in-house in Reno in the central office. So basically what we're proposing is reclassifying 3 positions as a result of these changes. The first one that I talked about, the business process analyst, that would be reclassified to a program officer 3. It was a program officer previously. This will bring it, excuse me. Currently the position doesn't have any supervisory duties. This will bring it back into the organization and make it responsible for the supervision of the staff that operate the NWDS system. That also includes license agent support. I should mention that. As a result of doing that, we want to take our existing program officer 3 and upgrade that to a management analyst 3. Management analyst, it's kind of a jack of all trades in state service. It has an analytic component. It also has a program management component, and we think that is a good level for this position to sort of oversee all the functions in the office as well as the system changes to NWDS, as well as a contract management of SEI's contracts for NWDS and the application hunt. And then also, as a result of NWDS, the amount of manual transactions that we have to input into the system has reduced dramatically. Currently, about 10% of our transactions are manual. That's a result of NWDS. It used to be the majority of the transactions are manual. So a license agent in a rural area doesn't have a computer. You come in to get a hunting license, they'll write it out by hand and give it to you. That gets mailed to Carson City. And then we had a staff of people that would input those documents into the system. And they would check transactions, they would make adjustments. It was a very manual, intensive process. We've already downsized that a little bit as we've developed NWDS. We see another opportunity that we'll no longer need an admin aide position. In fact, we've been holding that position vacant. We would like to kind of focus that into a little different direction. What we want to do with that position, since it's no longer needed for NWDS, is to reclassify it to an IT technician 2 to meet some of our IT needs. You know, we have about 250 employees scattered all over the state, and we basically have one IT professional who is a degreed computer network expert, and then we have an IT technician who's a little lower level, and they do a great job of supporting us, but it's very limited IT staff for as large of an organization as we are. When I was at Cultural Affairs, we had less than 200 employees. We were scattered all over the state, and we had 3 IT professionals to support that. So we're pretty understaffed in that function. And what we have found also is that the demands on our network staff has really grown considerably. More and more staff are moving from desktops to laptops because of the field work they do. Laptops require a lot more resources to maintain. They don't get connected to the network regularly for updates. You know, they tend to travel around a lot and be taken to conferences and using public networks, so they just tend to have a lot more issues and require a lot more maintenance. And our guys have been doing their best with that, but it's increased the workload quite a bit. And now we have the explosion of other mobile devices, phones, iPads. We support a lot of phones. Our staff are limited in their knowledge of some of those systems, and they're trying to learn, but there's just not enough of them to go around to support all that stuff. And we need to use and implement that technology. It saves us a lot of time. It saves us a lot of work. I personally am in favor of using more of these mobile devices where they make sense, because it's a lot cheaper than a laptop, and there's a lot of things you can do in a field with a mobile device these days, and you don't need a full-blown laptop. So if we're going to meet those challenges, we need more IT resources to deal with that. So, any questions on that? Anybody? Okay, the next item is our request for capital improvement projects. This is technically not part of our agency requested budget. This goes through a little different process. We submit our list of CIP projects to the State Public Works Board. The State Public Works Board has a hearing on those projects, and then they in turn make a recommendation to the governor. And then the governor will decide what to include in a CIP bill that he'll submit to the legislature. And then, of course, it's up to the legislature. Our State Public Works Board hearing is scheduled, I believe it's the 29th. I think it's the Wednesday of the last week of the month. I won't go through all of these, but the biggest priority on our list is the Las Vegas Multi-Agency Office. This has been in the works for a number of years. There is a piece of BLM land that's very near the Flamingo DMV. It's like maybe a few lots down. It's very close to that. It's BLM land. They've been working on getting a lease agreement to build a state building on that land for, I think, 6 or 7 years. There was a conceptual design done for that BLM approval that has finally occurred in this last year, and we now have the land secured. So what this requests, and this was a building that was originally designed for NDOW and the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, so it would have multiple agencies in it. And that's the concept we're going forward with, but because it was scoped so long ago, so much change has happened in a lot of these agencies with budget cuts and whatnot, that the need, the size, the scope of the building kind of needs to be re-engineered again. So this is asking for funding to do that design and engineering. And the way these normally work, in this session, if they approve the design and engineering, that'll get worked on for 2 years, and then you come back to the next session and ask for money for construction. It's going to be very difficult to get any CIPs through this cycle just because of the state's finances, but I'm hoping we'll get some traction on this because it has been in the works for so long. So, and it is just the design and engineering. The rest of it, I'll let you read through. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer that.
So that's your, go ahead, Dave.
So, Patrick, on items 6 and 7, you know, you can't hardly ignore the fact that you got to maintain your buildings on Valley Road, but what's the status of the UNR stuff? I know that they've been on hold with some of their movement, some, you know, planning into other areas, moving into other areas. Where are we at with the Valley Road building? Are we going to be dumping a bunch of money into a facility that we'll be getting out of anytime soon?
We don't see us getting out of Valley Road anytime soon. We think we're going to be there for a very long time.
It's back to a very long time, because there was a point where we were talking, hey, this could happen next year if we're not paying attention. And when the lease came up, that we were going to go to that, they were only going to allow us to go year by year, I believe. Is that right?
We own the building, they own the land, so I think we're kind of at a stand. In fact, they have not even been charging us the $5,000 a year, have they?
No, well, that was never a finalized contract, but they proposed to charge us $5,000 a year. That didn't go through.
I think we're there for a long time. What my goal has always been to bring the department together the best we could.
Right.
There's no way we're going to find money to build a building to bring everybody together. So the latest, and I'm hoping it's going to work out, is that right next door, they moved everybody out of that huge building there, and that we'd be able to bring Kitski there. So it's a matter of walking across the grass to have face-to-face interactions with the people that are doing your timesheet or your travel claim, whatnot. But there are some problems with that building, and UNR, quite frankly, will put their students and professors in a slummy situation. And we said we take care of the paint and the carpet, whatnot. We'll work a deal on the rent, but the problem is the HVAC is not very good, and some people boiled and some people froze in their muckalucks. So we have some work to do.
Yeah, we're all very interested in entering into an agreement, and it's kind of working through the university's process and trying to get some commitment to them to continue to make some improvements in their building. Their building's, it's similar vintage to ours. They've made some investments. They've made some investments where we haven't, and we have where they haven't. So I think we can make it work, but we're still working on that. And long term, I mean, maybe right where we're at between those two buildings, maybe someday there'll be a brand new Endow building constructed. I don't know. Sure would be nice. I mean, long term, the university has a long-term plan to develop that area. But in this environment, that could be 10 or 20 years down the road.
Yeah.
In the meantime, we got to try to keep our building going and investing in it, and
I
it'll be around for a long time.
Considering that, that there's a lot of connections there, considering that, I guess that's kind of the thoughts that are popping in my mind, there was a time where we were looking over at University Farms and, where else would you find a building? Maybe now's a good time where the heat's off, where there's opportunity to talk to the university and say, hey, we want to be part of your campus here as part of, maybe off on the fringe or whatever, but part of your overall plans. So when we knock these down, maybe we can help through the state system build a facility that houses us. And I don't know, it just seems like there might be a way to work some partnerships there.
Those are exactly the things that we've been talking to them about. I've been going to some of Cabner's strategic planning meetings, and so that we have a seat at the table, and I think they understand the relationship benefits them as much as it does us.
And Mark Johnson's the president now of UNR. He was the provost, which we interacted with quite a bit. He understands our needs and issues. We might as well tell you now in the public, there's some improvements that need to be made to our building.
Yeah.
Asbestos abatement, right?
No, it's they're redoing the electrical.
But there's
and sprinklers.
And sprinklers, so there's...
But to do that, yeah, there's some asbestos abatement issues they've got to deal with.
So we're going to have to move staff for how many months at a time? 3 to 4 months, potentially?
The project's supposed to start in October and last through April. And they'll basically shut down the building in thirds. And so a third of the building, all the staff will have to be moved out for a few months at a time as they do that work.
So you can imagine that mess. And one thing I've learned with age is that if you mess with where people sit, that's a big deal. So we're going to be moving people, and we're hoping to put people right across the way, but they'll be there. So you can imagine Sean Espinosa's going to pick up everything he owns that has to do with sage grouse and all the data and whatnot. We're going to have to relocate them for a number of months, and we're going to do that in thirds. So there will have to, everybody's patience, and the counter's going to be affected. The conference room's going to be affected, and so that's coming.
Towards the latter part of the project, we'll have to put the front counter basically in the conference room and let people access those doors while they're doing that section. It could limit availability of that room. Not a lot of work's going to occur in there, and I think that room will be open during most of the project, but it could, as we get closer and we know exactly what their time frames are, we may have to adjust meetings to alternate locations or something during that.
These are repairs that we have to do or mandated to do. It just,
They were funded as life safety issues because the wiring in that building in sections is as old as that building, and we had wires burning out in the ceiling, and it was not a safe situation. So. Okay, moving on to conservation education. Urban bear management, bear aware. This is one of 3 enhancement units requested for our budget. We have one for conservation education, one for game, and one for law enforcement. Basically what we're trying to do here is get some general fund back to deal with the urban bear management issues that used to be paid for with general fund. Currently, those activities are all being paid with state sportsman dollars and our federal wildlife restoration grant, which is also sportsman's dollars. So what this requests then is, in the case of conservation education, there's 2 components to the, and also what we're trying to achieve out of this is to enhance the Bear Aware program. We talked about that earlier. It's budgeted to spend about $1,700, and basically the Bear Aware program consists of a brochure that's periodically printed and handed out. That's all the program is. So we want to try to improve that as well to meet some of the public expectations up there. So what this does for conservation education is it asks for some general funds to cover some existing staff time dealing with that issue. In this case, our Western Region Conservation Educator 4 position, who's Chris Healy, he spends a lot of time dealing with the public and the press every time there's a bear incident up there, and we do track that time. What you see are reductions to the restoration grant and unrestricted revenue. That represents his time to be paid for with general funds instead. And the other piece is Bear Aware material. The biggest component there is a human bear conflict education video. What we're envisioning here is a full 30-minute production video on human bear conflicts, professionally produced. This would include 1,000 DVDs for distribution as well as digital distribution rights. And one of the things we thought about using this for was the hotels up in Lake Tahoe for their in-hotel programming. Maybe we can get them to run these. The DVDs, maybe we can pass them out to vacation rentals, that sort of thing, and direct people to the website to try to educate the public. And you know, I think the people that live up there year-round, people in Incline, I think most people get it and are bear aware, and I think most people do a good job of trying to address their trash issues. Not everyone, but I think the community by and large does a good job of that. I think where there are issues is all the visitors up there that aren't familiar with that have vacation rentals and that sort of thing, and they're not very bear aware at all. So we're hoping this will target some of those people. Also includes funding for billboards in the area, same purpose, as well as more brochures. And I'll cover the other pieces as I get to those other division budgets. Next enhancement unit requested is a position for our archery education program. We started the archery in the schools program in Clark County. That program has matured. It's being expanded into the Parks and Recreations Department down there, or at least we're discussing that with them, and actually including a unit for bow hunting for the Parks and Recreation Department. So you have archery education in the schools and then bow hunting in the Recs departments. And the archery in the schools program, that's like a PE program. It's been very well received down there. We actually are bringing up the position that ran that program down there up here to Reno, up to headquarters, with the intent of expanding the program statewide. Washoe County, all the rural counties, because we think it's a really great program. So what this does is it requests a position to maintain the program down in Clark County. A little bit lower level position, a conservation educator, just to maintain that program. And there is some expansion work. Like I said, we're currently working with the Parks and Recs department down there on the bow hunting, and that's still under development. So there's certainly enough work there to occupy a full-time position down there. You can see overall this is actually reducing expenditures. What we're trying to do, rather than just create a position from scratch, is we have a marketing coordinator position in the Conservation Education Division. We're giving that up and proposing reclassifying it to this conservation educator. The marketing coordinator position, that was funded back in the days we were getting $1.7 million in state support, and we've been holding it vacant for several years now because we haven't had that funding source, and we were going to eliminate it anyway. So. Any questions on that? If not, I'll move on to law enforcement.
By the way, I'll ask, do you want this much detail?
I can go faster if I'm boring you.
This is good. I like it. Good person.
Well, if somebody has a question, we can ask you, or if we can just kind of hit the highlights and get going.
Okay. Aquatic invasive species program. This is also in the fisheries budget. This is actually a very small component here of this program. You may recall they passed an aquatic invasive species bill in the last session, and the Commission has passed regulations for an AIS sticker fee for all boaters in Nevada. This sticker fee would be charged to motorized boats that we currently register, as well as non-motorized boats and out-of-state boats. That's where a lot of the state funding is coming for the AIS program that we're just in the middle of developing right now. For law enforcement, what we are looking here is we know that law enforcement will be able to charge some of their time to the AIS program as they do outreach. We think it's very important that we dedicate some warden time to that outreach. There's nothing like a guy with a badge and a gun, or a gal with a badge and a gun, to tell somebody they need to clean, drain, and dry their boat. It's a little more effective maybe than a college student seasonal. And we do want to concentrate some of that resource down on Lake Mead. So what we looked at was the equivalent of one warden full-time. It actually, in actuality, be multiple wardens, but we figure about a warden's worth of time that they would be doing those activities. That saves our general boating revenue, and it would be funded with the AIS sticker fee. Urban bear management, the law enforcement component of that. This is similar to the one you saw for conservation education. Basically, we're looking to replace funding for existing staff. Our game warden 3, who spends a lot of time up there, about 24% of his time dealing with urban bear issues. That would save about $22,000 in sportsman's dollars to be paid for with general funds. It also requests funding for a bear dog program to enhance non-lethal techniques. We currently have a program. There are 2 bear dogs. Those are Carl Lackey's personal dogs, and he does use them for bear aversion, but they're the only 2 we have, and they're his. And we would like to be able to assign to somebody on our staff to be able to run these dogs and use them. Other states have this. Washington, I understand, has something like 7 of them, and they're assigned to various staff, and it's a good way to do non-lethal aversion techniques, not only to bears, but to use them on mountain lions as well. So, next enhancement unit is the elimination of 2 boat warden positions. This is down in Clark County. The boating program has really been suffering from revenue shortfalls. The boat registration fees declined year after year. '07 was our peak, and they've declined. In this last year, they've actually increased a little bit. So I think we've hit bottom, and I think things are starting to improve. Overall, most of our revenue, state revenue, is up this last year. However, the other 2 components, the motorboat fuel tax and the Federal Coast Guard grant, have continued to decline as well. So we've really been struggling with this program and been holding these positions vacant to try to stay within budget. And I think we've done a pretty good job of doing that, but unfortunately we've got to let these positions go at least until the revenues for those programs can improve. So that's going to diminish some of our presence and our boating safety down in Clark County, but we don't have much choice given the amount of funding that's available there. Law enforcement, replacement equipment. This includes basically 3 types of replacement equipment for 3 different programs within law enforcement. The terrestrial enforcement program, they're requesting some replacement ATVs. In the boating enforcement and education program, basically they're looking for motors, safety collars, no new boats, because we don't have a lot of money in this program, but we've got to keep investing in those motors. As much as these guys are out on the water, they burn through those pretty quick. And the next component is communications equipment. We've been upgrading our system. We're required to go to be narrowband compliant by January 2013. We will meet that compliance. We've been investing in new radios to do that, but we need to make sure that we continue to invest in our system. And one of the big ticket items on here is this AeroFlex Communication Service Monitor. That allows us to monitor the radios and the frequencies at which they're transmitting. The unit that we have currently is very old. It's at least 15 years old, probably 20 or more years old, and it can't read digital frequencies, and we have both dual digital and analog phones, or radios, so this will really help us manage the system. Under new equipment, just a couple of items there, some repeaters for communications to enhance our coverage, as well as a couple of boat hoists, and that's for southern Nevada, just to keep our boats out of the water so our boats don't become quagga infested. Game management, I'm now on page 6. E250, Wildlife Health Program personnel. This is asking to create a biologist 3 position to serve as an assistant to Perry Wolf, our veterinarian. She's classified as a wildlife health specialist, and she currently does have an assistant. It's a seasonal position. Seasonal positions are different from our permanent positions. Seasonal positions aren't itemized in our budget. Seasonal staff can't work more than 3/4 time out of the year, and they don't have the same rights as a state employee. Most of them don't get any kind of pension benefits. We kind of use them as temporary labor. So we've been using this position a lot to try to assist her, and we value that program a lot and think she needs a full-time assistant, so that's what this does. So all these costs, they're listed as new costs, but there would be some offset from the seasonal staff that currently assists her now. We would just convert that. Urban bear management for game. Similar kind of thing here. We're looking to offset about $18,000 in existing personnel costs for their time for dealing with urban bears. And we're also asking to add a position, a conservation aid 3, on essentially a half-time basis to serve the Tahoe Basin. This would basically be an assistant to Carl Lackey. They would have their own vehicle and have all the equipment to deal with the urban bears. Carl had a position like this a few years ago when we had more money for this program, and it was very effective. It saved his time, it saved Warden's time, and they were able to be a lot more responsive in responding to the bear issues up there at a much lower salary rate. So we think that's real important to add back into the program. New equipment for the game management. They had no replacement equipment in their request, but they are requesting an ATV for the southern region for the upland game program, which should be new. Moving on to fisheries management. Aquatic invasive species. This is our proposal for the AIS plan for 14 and 15. A lot of this is still in development, but I think this is pretty well flushed out of where we would go with this program. First of all, let me just speak about the funding sources. There's a federal SFR AIS Outreach and Inspections grant. That is a new grant that was made available by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And it allows us to do a lot of inspections and decontamination, a lot of that work, as well as outreach. But you cannot use it for enforcement activities. So if inspections and decontaminations are mandatory, you can't necessarily use this grant money. But if it's voluntary, you can. And the other source of revenue is the AIS revenue. That's the sticker fee that I spoke about before. And the offsets are the existing funding sources. That is mostly for our current AIS coordinator position. That's Karen Vargas, our wildlife staff specialist. So she's currently being paid out of the regular grants and revenue streams. Once that AIS sticker fee starts coming on board and this grant, we'll start charging that. The grant's already been approved for the current fiscal year, and when we start doing boat registrations next year in January, it'll include the AIS fee. So for about the second half of this new fiscal year, we'll start collecting that revenue. What this does basically is it creates some seasonal positions, creates one for Lake Mead. It creates ultimately over the biennium 3 roving inspectors. These would be conservation aides that will be supplied with a truck and a mobile decontamination unit in the back of the truck so that they can meet the needs throughout the state in all 3 regions. Depending on what the traffic is for boating in a given body of water, they can move around as needed. And we see them doing quite a circuit during the boating season in all the regions. It also includes an education video, kind of like we talked about for Bear Aware, but for this time for AIS, and some advertising, billboards, similar type of thing there. And the biggest cost element here is subgrants. We see us partnering with state parks in particular. We know they are willing to hire seasonals if we subgrant them the money for Lahontan, Rye Patch, and Wild Horse reservoirs, and to staff those stations. We could be doing more subgrants in the future. We could have a partnership with Park Service. There actually is a grant that we just got from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for enforcement, AIS enforcement on Lake Mead and education and outreach. That we got an allocation of that. I understand Parks has got an allocation for that, as does Arizona. Arizona doesn't have an AIS sticker fee like we have. They do have AIS laws. They have laws about clean, drain, and dry. They do have an AIS coordinator, and they do some outreach, but they don't have a lot of funding. So we're kind of ahead of them in terms of Lake Mead with this AIS sticker fee and actually being able to fund a real program down there.
Patrick?
Patrick, quick question for you on this.
Yes.
There's, under operating, there's a fair amount of money in there for the educational video production, and then advertising is quite a bit higher than that. Is that purely the video approach, or is that brochures for your, the folks that are going to be in the field rotating around? Or I'm just thinking if you run into someone on the water, it's going to be a lot easier to hand them a brochure than a DVD.
Yeah, a lot of it is brochures, and it's billboards. I think the big cost was billboards. Yeah, and I can't remember the detail, but there may even have been radio spots.
And there's radio spots, billboards, handout material.
Yeah, but definitely a lot of handouts there included.
Chairman Rob. One of the questions that we asked Finance Committee meeting, and maybe it was also comments, was we hear that that we have quagga mussels in Lake Mead, and that we need take responsibility and control that, because it's these quagga mussels are now getting out and affecting other waters. And I pointed out that the Lake Mead, as well as the entire Colorado River system, Mojave, we happen to have another state that is involved with that, Arizona mostly, and asked the question, what is Arizona doing, and why is it this is falling on, the bulk of this falling on Nevada as opposed to Arizona. I realize we have more facilities on the Nevada side of Lake Mead, but there are some facilities in Arizona, and when you get down to the river system, then you've got a lot more with Arizona. And so it just seems to me that we shouldn't be shouldering, there should be some sharing of this, and I don't know what we can do, but I just raise the issue with, regard to, the state of Arizona probably should be. stepping up.
Larry Voiles and I have a really good relationship. He's the director of Arizona Game and Fish, and we've talked about that. The other angle is the Park Service, and back in Wafwa, I couldn't believe the response I got. They don't think that's a real issue at Lake Mead. That's the message that I got, because you got Mojave and all the other waters that are infected below, and so they're going to get a few bucks, but it's not like they're clamoring to help out at the level. They have some money that's going to be coming. It's going to be spread between the states, but you're absolutely right. I mean, we shouldn't be bearing the brunt of it. We should be sharing it. So Larry and I am talking, and they've got a lot more money than Nevada, because they're funded through a